Good morning and welcome to this session. It's wonderful to see you all. I guess I should be saying good afternoon. I'm Eastern Standard Time. I'm Tiferet Ani. Please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to know what you teach, grade and subject, and where you're joining us from. All right, so I am a high school teacher as well as a doctoral student. I'm currently living on Lenni and Lenape land in what is today Philadelphia. We're lucky to have Renee Goki here with us, who's been collaborating with me on this session. And this lesson that I'm going to share with you is focused on treaties and having students make sense of treaties between the United States and Indigenous nations. What I want to tell you up front is that we're packing a multi-day lesson into 50 minutes. And so you will have all the classroom materials by the end of the session, the slides, the resources. And so it may feel sometimes that we're going pretty quickly, but I just want to give you an overview of what this will look like with students. This session is participatory though, right? I'm going to be asking you questions and expecting your response in the chat or unmuting. So be ready for that. Be ready to be engaged, but don't worry if it goes fast, you will have all the materials. All right, so we have three basic things that we're going to talk about today. A hook to get students interested through visual analysis of art, analysis of the Treaty of Fort Wayne in 1809, and then looking at Miami and Potawatomi tribal sovereignty today. Emily, great to see you. Go DC area educators for social justice. All right, so as I'm speaking, Vanessa, our wonderful tech support, is going to be dropping links into the chat. Please do open the links that Vanessa drops in so you can zoom in on things and have a bigger picture of things. Renee, would you like to say anything about the artist?
Sure. I'll just introduce her a little bit, but I think we can talk a little bit more about her after people engage with the thinking routine. But the artist is Shan Gosshorn. She is a citizen, or she was rather, a citizen of the Eastern Band Cherokee of North Carolina. And her work is, I would say, pretty well represented in the National Museum of the American Indians collection. So we're really lucky to have had her work in our archives and do some research and produce some new work.
Thank you, Renee. And the link to the specific basket that we're going to be looking at today, invited to the table of deceit, has just been put in the chat. So do open that link up if it's better for you to see it than through the slides. This is a dinnerware set. There are multiple baskets. The central basket, the largest one, we have a detail of it. So just from looking at this one photograph of these baskets, we're going to do a practice called a chat waterfall, where people just rapid fire shoot responses into the chat so we can all see what you're thinking and noticing. So first question, very basic analysis, right? I'm going to ask you not to jump ahead towards meaning making or asking questions. Just what do you see in this detail of the basket? Excellent words. Men. Faces, suits, feathers, cursive, hats. Okay, well, thank you so much. Yes, there's different clothing. Just loving these responses, serious expressions, maybe some emotion. All right, so let's, native regalia, fantastic. All right, so we're gonna go to the next level of analysis now, the same practice, right? The same image. What are you thinking? what sense are you making now? Who do you think these people are? Why do you think they're here? What do you think those words represent? Okay, so questions are going to go for the next step, but I do appreciate that question, Colette. Oh, a treaty. Okay, we're already thinking this is treaty. How much of that is because of the topic of the workshop? I don't know. Treaty gathering, it's woven in a basket, formal meeting, decision making, photo after the signing of the treaty. Aha, people, Lisa's identifying who they are, a gathering of Native American and white officials. Okay, and Jennifer, great, thinks that the words represent the actual treaties. Okay, so now I want to hear your questions. What do you wonder about what you see here? Prima, that's a very good observation. So I already saw some questions about where are the women, right? And we have questions wondering about the balance of being seated versus standing. Are they on equal footing? What is the source of the photograph? What are the words? Excellent. Was it posed? What event makes this photo deceitful? Okay, these are fantastic questions. The purpose of the photograph. Where and when is this? I just love all of these. I could read these forever. Thank you so, was this a mutually agreed upon treaty? Okay. And thanks, Renee, for putting this Think Wonder protocol in the chat. Okay, fantastic. Thank you all for participating in that. So one of the things that I love about the website that Sean set up is that she has artist statements for her works. And so here's what Sean says in the description. It is excerpted. The link that Vanessa put in the chat has the whole artist statement. But for those of you who know something about weaving baskets, right? There's the warp and the weft, and that's how you sort of weave the basket plinths. And so in this statement, Goshorn is telling us that the Treaty of Medicine Lodge is the vertical splits, right? She basically put a photograph of the treaty on a vinyl type of, printed it on this vinyl sheet, cut it up in strips, and that's the vertical splits, right? Additional treaties are also there, specifically Navajo, California, Fort Wayne, the treaty we're going to be focusing on today, Canandaigua, Horse Creek, all these other treaties are part of that. So all the words are the words from treaties, as some of you already deduced. And this central picture, the photograph that's woven in there, is a photograph from 1868, a historical photograph taken by Alexander Gardner of Civil War fame, showing a Sac and Fox delegation with several US Indian commissioners. And Sean says that the title, Invited to the Table of Deceit, is very purposeful, right? It's to show the way that the United States government made these treaties in bad faith, right? With no intention of keeping these promises. And often, as treaties are being signed, the promises, the agreements are being broken. So here is a close-up, an uninterrupted by the weaving of this photograph. Renee, anything you want to say about this photograph, which is in the NMAI collection?
Sure, I'll just add on that, as you said, Tiff, this is a delegation of Sac and Fox leaders and chiefs. They're with an Indian agent and interpreter. My son said, what's a delegation? So, I said, an official meeting for politics. It does include one of my relatives. So fourth from the left, or the third leader over from the left, native leader, is Chief Moses Keokuk, who lived from 1821 to 1903. He was my third great grandfather. And he was, I think it's important just to note that oftentimes in history, there's a focus on Tecumseh or Black Hawk from the Sac and Fox tribe, or others who are kind of a singular leader, and who are often vehemently opposed to the United States, right? And so those are often the leaders that get talked about and included. But Chief Keokuk was a little bit different in that he did sign many treaties and he did work to accommodate the United States. And so it's complicated, but it's important to just kind of recognize that, we don't always hear from, some of those more complicated voices.
Thank you, Renee, for sharing that. And that's a big focus of the lesson, right? Is there's different ways to negotiate, right, survival and dealing with a hostile land grabbing power that's on your borders, right? And we're going to talk about that today in relation to the War of 1812. So after hearing Sean Goshorn's statements and the additional information from NMAI staff member Renee Goki and what's in the collections, how does the artist's statement and the basket, the artwork itself, deepen your understanding of treaty making? What are you now understanding about treaties that maybe, is different from what you thought before? Feel free to unmute at this point. I'd love to take 1 or 2 responses live or put things in the chat. Ooh, Allison is looking at it as performative. And I wonder if is that from the perspective of the United States, that the US is being performative, or is it from both the Indigenous and the American perspective? Optics, right? This thing was photographed for a reason, right? Optics for the United States. Colette says it confirms suspicions of bad faith. Oh yes, we definitely don't have all the answers at this point, right? Virtue signaling. I know we definitely, somebody asked, how were all the people chosen? We don't have an answer to that yet. The gravity, the significance of the moment, the seriousness of the expressions. That's excellent. Okay, so thank you for engaging in that question. I'm not sure how many of you live in DC, but a couple years ago, I don't know if it's still there, Renee, it might still be there, the exhibit, but the Nation to Nation exhibit was devoted to treaty making, right? And tribal sovereignty and how treaties between the US and Native nations had changed over time. And there's a wonderful book put out by the exhibit, also called Nation to Nation. Okay, so Vanessa, if you can re-put the artist statement in the chat, that would be wonderful. Oh, it's still on view. So if you are in the DC area, or you will be, please go see this exhibit. I'm not going to show you this video, but you will get the slides at the end and you will be able to watch the video. But this video clip is the video that introduces attendees to the exhibit. And in this video clip, the director of the museum, Kevin Glover, says, in order to understand fully the American experience, you have to understand the relationship between the United States and the Indian nations and how that relationship evolved. So what that means to me is that you cannot teach an American history class that doesn't include and take into account tribal sovereignty and treaties made between sovereign nations and the United States government. And it was after I went to that exhibit and attended a workshop with Renee, at this time I was writing curriculum for a public school district in Maryland, that I said, you know what, I need to add an objective here that actually gets students to grapple with tribal sovereignty. Whoops, and okay, skipping way ahead. I was scared the video was gonna play, so I was like, bump, bump. Okay, so I added this objective to our public school district curriculum. Asking students to really examine these treaties and analyze how Native people maintain their tribal sovereignty in the face of US expansion and demands for assimilation. And so this was actually a result of my interactions with the museum. So a lot of gratitude to Renee and the museum for broadening the way that I saw early American history curriculum and what my students then got. Okay, so we are going to be looking at one of the treaties that was used in the baskets by Goshorn, the Treaty of Fort Wayne, which was signed in 1809. We're going to look at a small excerpt of the treaty. Vanessa is going to put in to the chat a Google document link to what we're going to be using the rest of the workshop. It begins with an excerpt of the treaty. You're going to make your own copy so you can be able to take notes and write in this during the workshop. So please open that up and start reading the excerpt of the Treaty of Fort Wayne. I want you to notice who the Native nations are that are part of this treaty, that are making this treaty with the United States. And if you could, as you're reading, pop in the chat things that the Native nations gained from this treaty and the things that were given up. You have questions about whether the United States held true to its part. Yeah, and look at all of that land, right? All that country, 2.5 million acres. And I did put in parentheses that the payments are about 2 cents an acre, which is absolutely nothing, right? It's less than what Jefferson paid for the Louisiana Territory from France, right? I think that was about 3 cents an acre. These are all really excellent questions. Now, are there any questions? I see a lot of questions about the text of the treaty itself, which is wonderful. Does anybody have any questions about the context of the treaty? The events surrounding its creation? Why in 1809 is this treaty created with these specific nations? Is that a question anyone was wondering? Okay. The Homestead Act, that is much later in the 1860s. That's during the Civil War. Ooh, how did we deal with linguistic barriers in the negotiation? Was there actual negotiation, or did the United States just push this paper already written and say, sign it? These are excellent. Okay, who are the representatives? Are they official representatives or people the United States chose to represent tribes who may or may not be the official leaders? Wow, okay, we are going to be talking about Miami University towards the end. Thank you, Dr. Lopez. Okay, we're seeing settlement, Northwest Territory. We need to purchase this land so that white Americans can settle it. It's an excellent point. Okay, so right, we're wondering what's happening, the events. That's fantastic. And so in the lesson, I purposely do not give any context prior to this because it's also part of the contextualization lesson, right? I want to show students that having context is important and it helps you understand the initial document. So this was just the first read without context. And then what we would do, I created these timelines using a lot of the images from the actual exhibit to help students conceive of what was going on before this treaty was signed that would lead the United States and these Native nations to negotiate, right? What's the prehistory before this? So I'm gonna open up a timeline. Vanessa will drop the link to the timeline in the chat. What you'll see is there is a mixture of text and then video. The video clips come from a PBS series called We Shall Remain. We're not going to play the videos together. I'm just going to sort of talk through what is here. But students would get, you know, a lesson day to explore this timeline in depth and then just answer some of those questions that you see in your document about what was going on that may have influenced this treaty negotiation. And so going along with the table, invited to the table of deceit, this image is of the museum exhibit, the room that talks about this era of treaties. And you can see the title, Bad Acts, Bad Paper, right? So deceit, corruption, doing things in bad faith, right? Those are all represented by that museum title. And so a big thing that students know, the students that I teach based on the curriculum, is that we say, oh, the United States was given from Britain, all the land to the Mississippi. But the truth of the matter is Native nations were not defeated by the United States in the War for Independence. And they were not part of the treaty making. They did not cede their land, right? In what we call the Northwest at that time, or the Ohio River Valley, right? And actually, Native nations defeated the newly formed United States in 1790 and 1791. Right, at the Battle of the Wabash, to maintain their claims to their land. And here's Little Turtle, who was one of the Miami chiefs who led those forces. So we're kind of just seeing, okay, going through time, right? The Battle of Fallen Timbers, which was 1794, was a defeat of the Confederacy, these groups of Native nations. Miami and Shawnee were part of this. And actually, if the British had maintained their promises to these Native nations, it probably wouldn't have been a defeat. These nations retreated to a British fort in order to regroup and then counterattack, because the British wouldn't let them in. The British kind of were like saying, oh, who's winning, who's not? When are we going to go against the United States? When are we not? And that led to the defeat, right? Which led to this, Treaty of Grenville, right? Where you have most of present day Ohio being given up in exchange for $20,000 in goods. And as Renee put in the chat, there is, you can't even compare the way that these things appreciate over time, right? It's not an equal exchange at all. So part of initial context is a man named William Henry Harrison, who becomes a president of the United States. At this point in time, he is just a very ambitious governor of Indiana Territory. He is trying to steal more and more indigenous land so that he can again make Indiana a state, right? Get it out of its territory status. And so he starts these piecemeal negotiations with different tribal representatives, again, giving away, trying to get more and more land. And what he would do is, there's a tribe over here that won't give up land. I'm going to negotiate with all the tribes around them, get land, and then hem them in, right? And then almost like force them to give up more and more land. And so we all know a lot about Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa, both Shawnee. And Tecumseh has this argument that no individual tribe should be able to give up land. This land is held in common by all the indigenous people, right? And so he argues that all these treaties, they are not valid. And he forms, a community Prophetstown, in which he is trying to form a pan-Indian confederacy, right? Pretty revolutionary, at that time. He, travels a lot, tries to get more people to join. And he's basically trying to say, no, we're not giving up more land. So during this same time, when Tecumseh's fighting against these treaties, you have the Treaty of Fort Wayne, our treaty, which is often called the Whiskey Treaty, because there was bribery and alcohol used to bring these leaders into negotiation with the United States. And in fact, if you notice from the text of the treaty, tribes that weren't even present, like the Kickapoo, like the Way, they were included in the treaty, but they weren't even there. And so there's clauses that say, like, when they agree to it, then we'll get their land too, right? So it's a treaty negotiated in bad faith. And Tecumseh is furious about this treaty. He threatens to kill the leaders that negotiated with the United States. He threatens to fight Harrison if the treaty is not canceled. And in fact, Harrison decides after that point to attack Prophetstown while Tecumseh is away. And so that's where our context leads us, right? That there is this huge conflict here. So there is sort of the backdrop, right, of this Treaty of Fort Wayne. Let me know if you have any questions about the timeline or how this might be used with students in the chat. So so tell me this. answer our focus question. What events led Harrison to negotiate and these nations to negotiate? What would you say for Harrison? What is Harrison trying to accomplish by having these treaty negotiations? And I definitely invite people to unmute and share, but the chat is just fine as well if you're more comfortable that way. Thank you, Jess. Right? Statehood. Wants land taken from Indigenous people that is now the empty wilderness, right, for white Americans to move into. Right? Resources. Having American people there that are recognized by the American nation as citizens will solidify US hegemony over the land, right? Protect it from the British, who are in Canada, looking eagerly to a failure of the United States. Okay, so what about, they're already threatened by Tecumseh and want to whittle away at his power and the sovereignty that the Native nations have. Okay, so from the timeline, what things did you get are contributors to why the Miami, the Potawatomi, the Eel River, the Delaware would negotiate with the United States? What realities are making that seem like an option for survival of their tribes and traditions? Or what things are making it feel like they have no choice but to negotiate? Okay, an imbalance of power and weapons, right? So after the defeat at the Battle of Ballon Timbers, right? There's leaders like Little Turtle who are basically saying we can't fight anymore. We've lost too much. We have to accommodate. That's a way of survival. What would the fact that it was called the Whiskey Treaty maybe reveal about like why there were these negotiations? And definitely the British lack of support that they promised is a factor here. Yeah, okay, that's a great question. I think that's actually what Indigenous people called it. I think that would probably have been one of the critiques that Tecumseh gave, right? That it's not a legitimate treaty because people were tricked. They weren't necessarily in their right mind. They weren't really told what was in the treaty. The treaty had clauses for nations that weren't represented, all of those things, right? Fantastic. Okay, so yeah, very manipulative. What we're going to do now is we are going to go into breakout rooms. And what I'm going to ask y'all to do, and actually I'm going to give you a few minutes to read before we go into breakout rooms, because I know that as soon as you get into the rooms, you want to just start chatting with each other, which is great. But in step 3 of the Google Doc you made a copy of, there is a paragraph talking about the aftermath of the treaty and how this treaty is connected to Tecumseh's War, but also the War of 1812. And so I'm going to give you some time now to read that paragraph. And then when you get into your breakout rooms, discuss the consequences of the Treaty of Fort Wayne. What did it lead to? What was the results of it? And then evaluate it, right? Based on what you know the treaty said, the context before and the context after, did this treaty benefit Native nations or harm them? When we come back, we'll take a poll. All right, as people start to come back from the breakout rooms, please share the highlights of what you discussed in the chat. Consequences, your evaluation of the treaty, anything else you discussed. We'd love to see what great work happened in the breakout rooms.
So I'll just want to say that in my breakout room, one of my colleagues said that it was about appreciation, about genocide, about we want to acknowledge the violence that has been done to our people. And I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would urge anyone who did not have time, which you probably didn't, to click on the article by George Ironstrack. He really talks about the Miami experience in the War of 1812, and that's a good counter to the Shawnee experience, right? The Miami were trying to maintain neutrality, but yet war crimes were committed by the United States against them, right? Destroying access to food supplies, right? Like total warfare against civilians for really, illegitimate reasons. I mean, obviously there's never a legitimate reason to attack civilians, but even more so in this case because the reasons for doing it were disingenuous. Okay. Thank you so much for everything that you're putting in the chat. Vanessa's going to start a poll just to see where did you come on the issue of the treaty. Did this treaty, was it beneficial or harmful? And while you're answering the poll, just to give a little more context, I actually, with students, use two other treaties in this lesson as well, the Treaty of Canandaigua and the Muskogee Creek Treaty. And so this treaty is really one of the bad faith treaties, but the Treaty of Canandaigua, the Seneca actually got land back, right? So they're actually kind of comparing 3 different treaties in the full lesson and seeing some that were more beneficial. But yes, as expected, the majority of people, everybody actually, I think it's unanimous, said that this was a harmful treaty. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results so you can see that, right? For this one, there really is not much other argument for. Thank you. Yeah, and I like this thing about thinking about the quote unquote Trail of Tears, right? The removal in the Midwest, right? It was 33 tribes that were impacted by the Indian Removal Act of 1830. And so much of what we focus on is the quote unquote 5 civilized tribes, right? In the Southeast, which is extremely anachronistic language anyway, right? And so Renee is just putting a wonderful video to help. And in fact, Renee, I don't know if you have this at your fingertips, but there's an amazing online interactive where you can see how 6 different nations responded to removal and different tactics. And the Kickapoo is one of them. The Potawatomi is one of them, I believe. Is really wonderful for students to actually see the different political decisions that were made and the resistance and agency of Indigenous people who were affected by that legislation. Okay, so I think one thing that we all got from Rebecca Nagel's keynote is the fact that it is so important not to stop in the past when we're talking about tribal sovereignty and Indigenous people, right? We began with a contemporary artist, right? A recent artist's work. And we're ending now with examples of the Miami and the Potawatomi today. So I would love, Renee, would you like to say anything about these resources or tell me what I should show? What do you think is going to be the most beneficial here?
I think if we show just a couple, like a minute of the Chief Langford from the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma talking just for a minute, and then maybe we'll have time to show that CNN piece that you found, Tiferet. And I just wanted to add just a little context too. I mean, we talked about the context of this treaty, and Tiferet brought to light how important that is to understand around this particular treaty. And then there's also like the treaty making era and eras. And so there is a difference, with some early treaty making, and that the United States really needed the friendship and recognize the power of the Native nations. So while it can be easy because we're focused on this particular treaty, which was really a low point in treaty making, when there was so much deceit and millions of acres of land being dispossessed, it's important to know that there are eras, and despite all of this, Native people are still here. And so not to completely victimize Native people, because the fact of the matter is, because our nation signed treaties, and because treaties are the supreme law of the land as laid out in the United States Constitution, we are considered nations within the nation of the United States. So that sovereignty piece is really, really important. And all the work that tribes have done since these times to revitalize language, and to, work on food sovereignty and access to, homelands again, and environmental efforts, some of which are cutting edge in some places and communities. So I just wanted to mention that too. And it's important to link the historical, and dig in like we did with these treaties, but also very much to connect kids with the success stories and efforts of Native people today. So I think Chief Langford, maybe we could, I don't know if we could show just like a little clip so they get an idea of it, and then take them through the Potawatomi.
Yes, thank you so much, Renee. Yeah, and just, again, to really emphasize what Renee was saying, think about all the fishing rights and rights to resources that are guaranteed in other treaties, right, that are extremely, extremely important. So we are representing one slice here. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to look at other treaties. But someone in the chat earlier mentioned the Miami Center at Miami University, which is playing a huge role in language revitalization programs for the tribe. I'm going to play you just a little part of this video, which is the chief of the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma speaking and being honored actually at the National Congress of the American Indian for their work on revitalizing their language.
We add captions as well.
Aya, Akema, Ichipungwa, Wayneswani, Nila, Miyamia. I'm Chief Doug Langford, and I'm very honored to speak to you today. The voices of our youth people singing, "We are Miyamia." I extend the respect and gratitude of the sovereign Miami Tribe of Oklahoma to Harvard's Honoring Nations program for this opportunity to speak of our important cultural revitalization effort known as Miyamiyaki Amamwacheki, which means the Miamis, they awaken. Our cultural awakening began in early 1990, when the recognition that the loss of our language and culture had resulted in a significant disconnect from our cultural identity.
All right, I'm going to stop it there, but you have the link to it on the last page of the Google Doc. Whoops. One final thing I will show is this excellent interactive where Justin Neely of the Potawatomi is speaking to us using his the Potawatomi language. So I just want to play a little bit of one of these.
Sagamakwe, Mother Earth. Iljipi Sema Nibagegnako Sagamakwe Emadmuyan.
All right, so the idea with this is that I'm providing students with multimedia ways to see sovereignty today, right? And protection of culture and language, from video to, to text. So thank you so much. Vanessa put this link to the slides in the chat. Feel free to use this lesson with your students. Any questions or final thoughts about what things you might take and bring back to your own classroom and why this topic is important are most welcome. But I do thank you for joining me today. I thank Vanessa, the ASL interpreters, and Renee for their contributions.